we'll put together our 2 1/4, and this, just let you know, this will make 2 balls of pie dough. So we're going to put it all together, but in the end, after we've made our dough, we're going to separate it into 2 balls. So we're going to have to take our 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, our 2 1/4 teaspoons of kosher salt, and our 1 1/4 teaspoons of granulated sugar. And then if you guys have either a food processor or even like a pastry or dough blender, the one with it's like a half moon with a handle. If you have one of those, that'll work. If you don't have that, either like 2 bench knives. I don't know if you have, like, these are bench knives. Use 2 of those to cut in the dough, or to cut in the butter into the dough. If you don't have that, 2 forks or 2 butter knives, like my grandma would have done it. And so normally when we demo making pie dough, Paul will use a food processor. The blades sharply cut the butter in, so it's important not to basically just mush the butter with the flour. You want it to cut in and make like really tiny little pieces. That's what makes it flaky. So when you get those little tiny pieces of butter that stay kind of like its own entity within the flour and the sugar and salt, that's when when you bake it, all the little pieces of butter melt away and it makes those beautiful flakes in your pie crumbs. So you'll take your dries and you'll go ahead and you'll add that to to your food processor, or just your bowl if you're going to be cutting it in manually with your hands. And then you're going to take your 9 tablespoons, or if you have a scale at home, 4.5 ounces of your chilled butter. And then, because we're going to have 2 additions of butter into our dough. The first one is a larger addition. You want your butter to be really, really cold when you cut it in, so then it doesn't, then you're working it less. The less you work it, the better. And then with our first addition, we're going to cut it in into pea-size pieces. So what you're going to do is, once you have the butter and all your dries in there, you're going to pulse it. We'll start with a few times, maybe for like a couple seconds a piece. Okay. If it still looks a bit chunkier, so right now I've got like some bigger pieces. This is a little too big still. So we're gonna let it go a couple more times. That looks a bit better. More like this, about this size. Smaller than your fingernail. So then once the first addition is pea-sized of the butter, then you're going to take your frozen butter, that's the 5 tablespoons, the 2.5 ounces of the frozen butter. You're going to add that to your food processor or your bowl. And again, you're going to pulse it a couple times. Again, what you're looking for is you still want to see those little specks of butter. Even when you're like putting your ball of dough together, you don't want to mix it too much. Like, you're not kneading it so much that those little pieces of butter are melting. You don't want the warmth of your hand to melt those. So once you put the frozen butter in, go ahead and pulse it. Okay. Open up your lid, see where it's at. You might see that the flour is turning a little bit yellow. That's a good sign that that's what you want to start seeing. There might be some larger chunks of butter. What I would do at this point, like if you still see some, they're not evenly all getting cut in, that's okay, don't worry. Just kind of break it up a little bit with your fingers. Just in it, not like, not mashing it, just breaking it up a little bit into smaller, almost like pea-sized pieces. Go ahead and run your hands through the whole batch of flour, all the what you have in your mixer, and break up anything that you see is on the larger side, because you want it to be more consistent. So then when you go to pulse it for the final couple times, that they'll all be, you're looking for like cornmeal size pieces of butter in there. So on the finer side, but not where it's coming together. You want it to all be totally loose. Just like a dry mix. You don't want it to be coming together like a cookie dough. Still got a couple more bigger pieces. All right. Now, once you break up the bigger pieces, go ahead and give it another couple pulses for a couple seconds. Okay. And what you want it to look like is similar to this. You see, you can see little yellow specks of dough. The flour's changed the color of it, so you know that the butter has been cut in enough. If it was still really white, that means that there's probably a lot of chunks left. And you want to get it to that happy medium of where there's just like little pebbles, it's just like little pebbles of dough. It's all loose. If there's some slightly bigger ones, like this, you know, like maybe a little half a pea size, that's okay. You are going to still put it together by hand into a ball. So that will that'll work together when you're putting it on the table. All right. So now you're gonna go ahead, put your bowl or leave your bowl on your mixer. And now it's time for the water. So what Paula does with her Pido water is, I think if you saw that we add some red wine vinegar. If you don't have red wine vinegar, that's okay. You know, sometimes we'll use a little apple cider vinegar if we're out, you know, like during COVID, it was really difficult. Like we're running out of ingredients, or, you know, our vendors would run out of ingredients frequently. And so sometimes we would have to use apple cider vinegar. Or, you know, sometimes we would even use white vinegar. That's probably our like last resort. But like red wine vinegar has like a little bit of a sweetness to it, but it helps kind of like relax the glutens in the flour, and so then she adds that to her water. So when it rests, it doesn't climb back at you when you're rolling it. It helps the dough relax a bit more. It's not, doesn't have that elasticity so much. So what you're going to start with, it says you have like a half cup measured out, but what you're going to start with is you're just going to go ahead and add in, like, just start with 6 tablespoons of the cold water. You're going to go ahead and put that in. And now for this, you're just going to pulse it a couple times. Again, you don't want to bring it together. You're still going to want it to come out pretty loose when you take it out. So start with 6 tablespoons. If it seems pretty dry still, we might add a little bit more. But again, that can depend on how much liquid we use. Depends on like the humidity of the environment, how dry the flour is. So we start with about 6 as a rule of thumb. So we'll go ahead and pulse that a couple times. Kind of run your hands through it. Okay. And then if you see that when you bring it together, if it kind of starts to stick together just with your hands, that's good. If it's still really dry, maybe we'll go ahead and add maybe like 1 more tablespoon of water. But again, we don't want it to be too wet. We don't want it to come together in the mixer. It's really just hydrating it a bit and making it so that it will, when you're rolling it out, it doesn't crack. If you've ever had the pie dough and you roll it out and it's just like cracking and it doesn't stay together, it just keeps on breaking off in bits. It may be because there's not enough water in the pie dough. So we'll go ahead and just pulse it another couple quick times. Take it off. Squeeze it. All right. Well, I think that mine is coming together pretty well when I squeeze it together. And you see all these beautiful little dots of butter in there. That's gonna make all your flaky bits in your pie crust. So I'm gonna take mine off. If you still think it's a little too dry, then you can go ahead. I would maybe do like 1 more tablespoon of water. But otherwise, I think this is good.
Awesome. And Caitlin, we have 1 or 2 quick questions. One person asked, why do you use a mix of cold and frozen butter?
So once you have already added in the cold butter, that's the initial bits, like that's the easiest to work in because you don't have as many ingredients kind of like warming up the flour at once. So it's important now, since the dough had already been worked for a certain amount of time, to cut in that larger addition of butter. To keep it frozen, then it reduces the risk of it melting easier. So you're really, the frozen butter, then it's like you're able to get those like nice, more like solid chunks of butter instead of then it's all starting to form like a homogeneous ball.
Awesome. Thank you. And then just 1 more question while we're on this step. One person asked, how do we mix in the water if we're using a pie cutter or doing it by hand?
Oh, sure. Then, I would just go ahead and put it into the bowl, all 6 teaspoons into your bowl, and maybe like drizzle it around. And then just start to take the pastry cutter, and then because I'll use that at home instead of taking my food processor out, and I'll just kind of like fold it. We do a lot, like normally we'll do 24 balls of dough at a time here. So it's a lot of folding, but we do everything in the mixer, but it's still like will come out 24 balls of dough like this. So in order to like mix all the ingredients together without like, I guess kind of smushing it all together too much, we're cutting it with, if you want to use like a knife or something like that to kind of like cut it in half for your dough and then folding it over, that will kind of like help disperse the water together a little bit more evenly too. If you ever like have made biscuits or anything like that, and you're doing like buttermilk and stuff, like that's kind of what the same process, like folding, you know, kind of like cutting it, laying it all out, working, and then cutting it and folding it.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I think that's it for right now. But of course, anybody, if you have questions as you're going through the process, please feel free to type them in the Q&A.
All right. So, so once you have your water in, you're going to go ahead and okay. So you'll dump out all your dough onto the table or your table. Okay. And then you'll kind of want to like separate this into, I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect either. But two separate piles, as even as you can get them. And then like if this were, you know, summertime, we were doing fruit pies, you know, you could use one as the bottom piece and one as the top piece, or you could use the second piece as lattice, whatever you want. So now what you're going to do once you have this on the table, we sort of like, more so you're not like kneading it, but you're kind of rubbing the butter into, you're more so like creating a layer of butter with your flour. You'll bring it together and you're like rubbing the butter into it. And you're gonna want to do this the least amount as possible, because again, you don't want to melt those little butter pieces. You want to keep them as much intact as possible. And then once you kind of have, you've kind of rubbed the butter in a bit where that it's all starting to come together a little bit now, then you're just going to form a ball. And you want to try and make it, the rounder it is, the easier it will be for you to get a more of a, like a round cutout when you're rolling it out to roll out for your pie shell. So you can put that one aside and work on your second one. Again, kind of like rubbing the butter into it. I forget what move it's called. It's a pastry move. And bring all your dough together. Form a second ball. So once you have these two guys, then I would go ahead and you have some plastic wrap, or just like it's best to kind of keep it from being exposed to the air. It kind of dries it out if you just put it into your cooler without wrapping it at all. So I would recommend wrapping it either in some plastic or even like a Ziploc baggie, I think, if you had something like that. And then the next step is that we need to let these chill for about 20 minutes, like 15, 20 minutes. We'll try to get them as cold as we can. but still able to move on to the next step. We call this, we're gonna let it rest, our dough rest for a bit. All right. And then while we let our dough rest, we're gonna go ahead and get our pumpkin filling together. And I know some people may be allergic to pumpkin. I was saying that we don't really have another pie that is made like assembled similarly to the pumpkin, but I was like, if you want, I feel like these flavors would go well with like a sweet potato pie that I haven't used sweet potato as a substitute for pumpkin in this recipe, but if you wanted to try to like roast some sweet potatoes, and then what we would do is we put it in a food processor and then through a strainer, and it's called like we tammy them to get all the little fibers out and any chunks that are remaining. And then you could probably go ahead and assemble a pie similar to this. And then, so today we're not going to actually bake the pumpkin today because your shell won't be ready, but you can save your shell for another time, like for the future holidays, or if you want to bake it like within the next 3 days, the pumpkin filling will be good for a few days in the refrigerator, just sitting in like a sealed container. Great. So if you want to grab all of your stuff to make the pumpkin filling, okay, so we want to go ahead and start with, if you guys were able to put some of your ingredients together, measure them out. Again, these are your ingredients. That's what we always say do first here. So we're going to go ahead and take all of our dry ingredients and put those in a bowl first, and we're going to mix them together with our fingers. You could also use a whisk. Sometimes the brown sugar, it's easier to use your hands and your fingers because then you're able to like break up those clumps a bit better. So to start, you're going to go ahead and put in your brown sugar and your pumpkin pie spice, your white sugar, your salt and pepper. Since there's pinches in here, I kind of put like my salt and my pepper in with my white sugar and also my pumpkin pie spice. And then the flour. Right. And then you're going to just like take it and use your fingers to break up those clumps, all the clumps you want to bring all the dries into a nice, like loose, homogeneous texture. And you're gonna take your dry, set those aside for a minute. And you're gonna start putting your liquid ingredients together. So first you're gonna wanna take your eggs and you're gonna wanna whisk those together. So this is done in a separate bowl. Whisk those up, break those up. There doesn't have to be like a color change or anything. You just want to break them up a bit like you're making scrambled eggs. All right. Then you're going to go ahead and you're going to add your cream. And I can go ahead and also mention how much that is in case anyone's getting that together as you go. So it's a 1 cup of heavy cream. And then it's going to be a 1/3 cup of whole milk. You're just going to go ahead and whisk those up a little bit to combine. So just not looking for a froth or anything, just so that the egg and the cream, the dairies combine. All right. Then you're going to go ahead and add in your 2 cups of pumpkin. And you're going to also add, so we use vanilla paste here. That means like, so we actually have like the vanilla beans that is in, it's like a more of a viscousy texture. But the actual like vanilla beans are in it. It's not like that clear. But if you don't have vanilla paste, I mean, find it in the stores. You could order it online. Or maybe at like a store, maybe a spice shop. We go through Epic Spices in the neighborhood. I'm not sure if they have it, but maybe they might be able to get it if they didn't, or Spice House. But yeah, like more of like a gourmet food store might have something like that. And so that's gonna be 2 tablespoons of vanilla paste. If you have vanilla extract, that'll work too. No big deal. Then you're gonna go ahead and whisk that together.
And Caitlin, if anybody's using vanilla extract, is it the same amount of vanilla extract?
I think I would start off with maybe like 1 tablespoon, and then I would say maybe we can. I think it usually is 1 to like substituted equally, but depending on how strong it is, maybe if you want to start and if you want to like taste a little bit of the batter. I mean, I know there's raw egg in it, but I think that unless you're super sensitive to it, I would say maybe give it a little taste first before you add in the full 2 tablespoons. But I think at least 1 tablespoon should be a good start.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. So you're going to want to make sure you're like scraping up the bottom too as you're whisking it so that you're getting everything together. So just so that it's all combined. And now you're going to go back to your dry ingredients and you're going to add these into a few rounds, like into thirds. It's so that you don't get like big chunks of brown sugar, or that you can sometimes, like when we're working with large batches of pumpkin, like normally we'll make 16 pies worth of pumpkin filling at a time. So it's good to just kind of like add it as you go along so that you know that you're not getting that brown sugar can be like really clumpy, so that you're not just going to end up with like a large piece of brown sugar in your pie. You're just going to whisk it so you don't see any more clumps in there. Go ahead and another third of your dries and whisk that up. And then the last of it. Great. So that looks all mixed together. You don't see any big chunks of brown sugar or anything in there. So now, as I was saying, we're going to go ahead and we can save this pumpkin pie filling for later, just due to the amount of time that we have. We're not going to be able to roll out our pie shell and bake it, and then also wait for the pumpkin pie. Takes at least like 45 minutes to bake just itself. So we'll just kind of we'll save that for another time, but I will show you what the pumpkin pie will look like when it's done, like a baked finished pumpkin pie. So our pie dough is, maybe we'll let that sit for maybe just another few minutes. And so I was going to show you how to blind bake a pie shell once you have it rolled out and everything. I was going to save it for last, but since we still need the pie dough to cool a little bit more, I'm just going to go over how to blind bake a pie shell. Okay, so once we've gone ahead and finished our crimp, when I'm going to show you how to roll it out and crimp it, you'll want to go ahead and freeze the pie shell for at least a couple hours. But otherwise, your crimp can last, especially if you like wrap it in plastic wrap. It could last like till the holidays. I would say probably no more than a month frozen though. And definitely you should wrap it pretty well with plastic. But before you bake it, you should definitely freeze your pie shell before you put it in the oven. So what we do here when we're going to bake a pie shell for, say, making a pumpkin pie, you're going to want to get the bottom crust crispy and done, because if you just went ahead and poured in the pumpkin filling right now and baked it together, you get more of like a soggy bottom, a soggy pie crust at the bottom. So what we do is we do a thing called blind baking, and how we do that here, and you could do this, I got it at home. I just bought like a bag of pinto beans, but we buy like the commercial sized coffee filters. I can show you one. They're a bit larger than like just the ones you get at home, but I'll take the ones that I use at home and I'll just put like 6 of them or 5 or 6 of them, whatever it takes to kind of cover the whole bottom of the shell. And then pour my pinto beans in there. And this helps weigh down the pie shell so you don't have the crust bubble up on the bottom and you get those air pockets. So that's, or if you have pie weights, that'll work too. But we use pinto beans and we'll just kind of change them out as they start to dry out, get flaky, and then we'll just compost them and then get new ones. So what we do is you take your frozen pie shell and your coffee filter, or you could also use a piece of parchment paper, that would work, and lay that big enough to cover the inside and come up the sides. It's important for the beans to come all the way up the sides because otherwise you could have your pie shell, if you've ever had your pie crust fall in, like sink into your tin. This helps it keep its shape and its height. And then keeping it frozen will help keep your crimp more defined. So you go ahead and you fill up your coffee filters up to basically up to the top, what we say up to the top of the crimp. And then you would go ahead and you put this on a baking sheet and put it in the oven for a convection oven. It'll be 3. Okay, so we're convection and so it'll be 400. So you'll put it in at 400 for a convection oven, and we do it for about 12 or 13 minutes, and then we rotate the tray and do it for another 12 or 13 minutes. And then what you would do is, if it's a convection oven like we have, then we do it at 350, same amount of time. And then what you want to look for when you lift up, we just like lift up the filter a little bit. You want to look on the bottom and see if it kind of has like a more of a translucent look to it. It has like almost like a wet look. Then you're looking for more of a drier bottom, and so that you know that it's been cooked. Once you start to see that it's on the drier side, and I'll show you a baked, blind baked pie shell as well. If it's just like when you take out the filter and if you see like little patches of dough that look a little on the raw side, what you'll do is you'll take a fork and without puncturing it all the way through, you'll just gently poke the fork along the bottom, just of the parts that look raw. Don't fork the parts that look dry, because then you're just going to create holes in your pie shell. And if you're making something like a quiche or like a pecan or like a custard pie, that'll leak out the bottom. So you just want to do it on the doughy parts and give it a few little fork pricks, and that's so that you're venting it so that the crust won't create a bubble when you're putting it back in the oven and baking it the rest of the way, because you're just going to put it in without the beans and you're going to let it finish baking. Let me show you an example. So this is like a finished pie crust. See, it has like a nice like toasty color here, a little bit darker, but you don't see any like wet, more like, I'm trying, where it should be more of like a whitish color than like a translucent color. And then you get the nice toasty color along your crimp. Okay, so time, we're going to go ahead and roll out our pie shell.
And Caitlin, can I hop in with 2 quick questions before we do that? I'm just going to hop in with a couple quick questions. One person asked, can you just remind us how long we're blind baking for?
Sure. So I'd say from 12, so total time about 24 to 26 minutes is usually what we do, but we rotate it halfway. So we'll do 12 or 13 minutes and then rotate the tray and do it for another 12 or 13 minutes.
Perfect. Awesome. And then I know you covered poking the crust with a fork only where it looks doughy, so not to begin with. And then the second question was, if you're freezing your pie dough for later time, when you take it out of the freezer, should you let it defrost in the fridge or just bake it frozen?
So the, if you're gonna do the pie, if you're gonna freeze the ball of dough, then I would let it defrost in the fridge. Just to about, you want it to still be cold when you roll it out, but you don't want it to be so cold that it's just cracking everywhere. But if you're talking about the shell, if you're freezing the shell, saving it for a later time, you bake it from frozen.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. So now for this step, I don't have one of these at home. Usually I'll just kind of eyeball it, or I have like this tool that almost looks like a protractor where I can go around depending on what size, it'll tell me like, oh, tart size or pie size, whatever, 12-inch pie. So we usually use a pizza pan. But it also depends on what size your pie tin is that you're putting your shell in. But you want it to be about 13 inches in diameter. But, if you have a smaller, like a tart pan or something like that, you can also just place your pie pan over your piece of dough and kind of eyeball it. But since we do make so many of them, we try to be consistent with the weight of the pie shell and also the size of it. So we're going to use that to cut out the pie round. You're going to take your ball out. Also, so you have 2 balls of dough. You can also freeze that other ball of dough. And you don't have to make a crimp with it. You can do whatever you want with it. But I'll show you how to go ahead and roll and crimp one out today. So if you take your ball out of your dough, and you'll see little butter specks too on there, that's what you're looking for. If it got colder, you'd be able to see a lot more little white butter specks. It's pretty cool. That's when you know that you did it right. But so what you'll do is go ahead and take both hands over the ball and kind of smash it down a bit. This will make it a little easier for you to roll out if it's a flatter disc. So kind of like that. And I don't smash it incredibly thin. Again, it's not the coldest right now. I would prefer to have it be a little bit colder. You're going to want to put a little bit of flour down wherever you're going to be rolling. Grab your rolling pin. And so how you will go ahead and start to roll out your pie shell is you'll press your rolling pin down in the middle, and you'll kind of roll it out like a clock almost. So you'll go ahead and start rolling it at your 12. And then rolling down to 6, always from the middle of your pie round, because you don't want to make your ends super thin. And then you can rotate your dough. And I would go ahead, rotate it like all the way across then. If you need a little bit of flour, I would just, use a little bit if you need to, if your dough's sticking a little bit. And then go ahead and roll out your 12 again. Always from the middle. And then go out to your 9. Rotate. And then if your ball starts to kind of like crack a little bit, you can just kind of like smash it. I just kind of like move it together a little bit. I'll overlap it a little bit and then roll on that little crack to kind of bring it together a bit. All right. So you want to roll it out and like kind of, if you want to take your pie tin or whatever you use to kind of measure out normally, like for your pie, or if you have a ruler, if you want to like kind of measure it out to be about the size of about like 13 inches across. Go a little bit more. You don't want to roll it too thin. You're really just trying to make sure that you like roll it as evenly as possible so that you don't have some sides that are a little on the thicker side. But if you do, that's okay too, because we're going to go ahead and crimp it still. You're going to go ahead and cut out your pie round. And then kind of like with these little scraps, I like had written in the recipe, normally we'll save all our scraps and just from the first roll, and we put them all together. And what we'll do with the scraps is, like you could put it together in a ball and wrap it up in some plastic wrap. And then what we would do is we roll that out again one more time, and then we cut out leaves from that. And then that's how we decorate our pumpkin pies. We bake off leaves with some pumpkin spice and sugar we sprinkle on there. So you can save your scrap dough if you want to do something else fun with the pie scrap. So I have my pie round here. And sometimes it's easier for people to, if you want to fold it in half, like that, and place it so that you can see it's like in the middle. And then unfold. And you want to place the round as the most in the middle as you can, so that all these little pieces on the edge here are even. And then you're going to want to go ahead and just around the crease of the pie tin, you're going to press down with your thumb a little bit. And this makes sure that you're not lifting up too much of the dough from the pie tin, because when you're crimping, if you lift up too much, then this is going to be, it's going to kind of like shrink up a bit, and or it's going to fall in. Those are like the two possibilities that could happen if you pull up too much on the dough. So you're going to go ahead and just run your finger around. So that it's nice. You can see like the nice pie tin crease along here. And then what we're gonna do is now we're gonna crimp it. So what we do here is like a method. It's probably like one of the harder things for people to start to get used to. But what we do is we create a coil first around the rim of the pie tin. So this little ledge here, or if you have one at home that just has like a little edge, you're going to tightly roll. I compare it to like if you were like rolling your yoga mat up or like rolling up the piece of paper of sorts. And so you just want to make a tight little roll, and you want it to rest right on the edge of this pie tin here. You don't want to pull up too much. You don't have to take it. You still want to be able to see this crease in the pie tin. So it's just like a little roll guy right there. And you want to take your thumb, if you're right-handed, take your thumb of your right hand and help push it under and twist with your pointer finger. Twist. And I use my left thumb to hold the roll down here so that I'm not lifting up too much dough. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, I think so.
And then we're going to twist all the way around. And you don't want to be just shoving it into the pie tin. You want to create a tight twist, because then that's going to give you all that nice coil of dough to make a really nice defined crimp in there. Okay. So once you have your coil all the way around, I go over it one more time and kind of like let the coil rest on the little ledge of the pie tin. Make sure that I'm making that crease in the bottom of my pie tin again. Great, and then now we'll begin to crimp. And so whatever, people use different fingers depending on what feels comfortable to them. I usually use my thumb, and then my on my right hand, and my pointer finger and my thumb on my left hand. These two fingers are creating the like the U shape of the crimp, and then my thumb is kind of pushing in to make the point of it. So like that, and I'm kind of like pushing down into the pie tin ledge as I do this. If you like to make it a bigger scallop or something like that, that's cool. Whatever, or a pointy one. However you like aesthetically you want your pie to look. It doesn't have to look like this, but just how I've kind of grown to do it. But you want it to not go sit over the ledge too far. You want it to be like just kind of just sit on that ledge just really nicely, because otherwise if it's off the ledge too far, it might bake and like kind of slough off the edge of the pie tin. But also if you don't pinch out enough, it might bake and fall in too. So you want it to really have that secured on the edge, not too far off and not too far in. Yeah. So there is a finished, pie shell. And then I would go ahead and put this in the freezer. And again, let that freeze for a couple hours at least, or like, again, you could save it for another time if you want. And yeah, and then you'd go ahead and blind bake it. And after you blind bake it, then you go ahead and pour your filling into the pie shell, just up to about the top of the crimp. And I'll grab one that's finished so you can see. Then the other side. Yeah. So this is what it'll look like. A bit, you want it to be like a bit shiny still, but when you're baking it, you'll want it to be, if you touch the top of it, you don't want there to be a tackiness. You don't want pieces of it to come up on your hand. That means it's too wet still. It'll be slightly puffed, and it'll be on drier, but still a bit shiny. Yeah, so I think that was all I had for you today. If you had some questions.
Well, Caitlin, thank you so much. This was so fun. We do have just a couple quick questions, and I know we're tight on time, so we will try and breeze through these. So one person asked earlier, whenever they bake a pie crust, the crust always shrinks back, always, no matter how high she fills the pie blind baking. I know you touched on that a little bit before of when you were doing the blind bake, but what are your tips for making sure the crust doesn't shrink?
Okay, so yes, so definitely not pulling up too much when you're crimping it. So, and if you need to, I would maybe make your what you roll it out to a little bit bigger than maybe you have been. Like, or you could do just like a very like rustic sort of crimp, but like I would say the more dough you have that overhangs from your pie tin, what you're using, the more of a crimp you'll be able to make without also like pulling up on the bottom of the shell. Because if you're pulling up too much from the bottom, then it's just kind of like when this bakes, like if this is pulled up more and it bakes, it's gonna go ahead and shrink in, and it's not gonna stay, it's not gonna keep your nice crimp. So I would say probably cutting your round a bit bigger than you normally do. And then also making sure that you're pressing in the bottom of your pie round into your pie tin as you're crimping it, so that you know that you're not pulling up too much on it.
Awesome. One person asked, can you just confirm, I think in the directions that you sent out, it maybe said the conventional oven, the temperature should be 350 and 300 for convection. Is that correct? Or if you could just repeat the temp.
So convention would be 400 and convection is 350.
Okay, perfect.
Wait, you're talking about the pie dough, right?
For blind baking.
Yes, yes. So it'd be 400 for convention and 350 for convection.
Perfect. Great. One person asks, is it okay if the pumpkin pie cracks when it's done, or any tips to avoid cracking with the top of the pie?
Yes. So for that, and it is on there some tips are on there too, is that if you take, so here we'll always put our pumpkin pies on a rack with a tray over it. So that moisture tends to like help it keep from cracking. So I think what Paula says in her recipe book is to take like a large bowl, and after it's out of the oven, kind of put that large bowl upside down over your pie, and then that'll keep that moisture, kind of will help it keep from cracking.
Sorry, I was muted. This is just a more fun question. What is your favorite type of rolling pin? Or do you have any recommendations if someone's in the market for a new rolling pin?
Actually, I mean, I always thought that I like the kind with those handles, but I really like these now. I feel like I have more like control over the pressure that I put on it. You know, I could put it more in the middle if I was like, oh, this piece of dough is a little bit thicker in the middle than I want it to be. Like, you're able to change like where on the dough, the position of where you're putting the pressure. So I really like these pins, and we actually can't find, we don't know where to find more of these. They're like, they have more like a laminate on there. Like we do have one it's more like a raw wood, but it kind of sticks to the dough a bit more. So a more like smoother finish is nice, but this type of pin is probably my favorite now. The French rolling pins are nice too, the kind that are tapered a bit at the end, but these have a bit more weight to them too, that we like. Oftentimes we're rolling out pretty cold dough, so that helps us a little bit too.
Awesome. Well, I think that was it for our questions. Just a lot of people chiming in saying that this was great and they really enjoyed it. So thank you so much, Caitlin. And again, Caitlin is the general manager at Hoosier Mama Pie Company. There's a few different locations. So if you were intrigued by this process, but want to maybe make some pick up some pre-made pies, I know they've tons of options in store as well. So thank you all so much for joining us. Caitlin, thank you again. I know it's a super busy time for you, and we appreciate you joining us for this event. And yeah, thank you all, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, Emily.